This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at Chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 22, Wibbly Wobbly, Timey Wimey, Worm. The sun rose, and us with it, dressing hastily and marching down the staircase to wait for Worm. I knew that he could read my mind, so I kept sending out signals to ask him to come to us. I was still troubled by last night's terror. I knew it was more than a dream. It was an omen. We reached the cave and waited expectantly. The floor began to rumble, and Worm's head popped up from the earth. I stopped pacing and stood still, too anxious to sit and chat. Ask. I saw something last night in a dream. Glenn's death. I need to know if it was only a warning or if it'll happen. Worm came closer, searching me. You are turning from the quest? I don't know, I said, stiffening. I know I shouldn't be so affected by a dream, but I need to know what's in store for us and if there's any way I can keep Glenn safe. Glenn, will you wait for us upstairs? What I have to tell is for her alone. I felt a pang of fear at the thought of Glenn leaving me. He will be fine, Alana, and so will you. Glenn turned to me and held both of my hands in farewell. I'll be in our room. Good luck. I love you, no matter what you choose. I watched him climb deliberately up each step until the curve of the staircase took him from my field of vision. He didn't want to go, I could see. It took immense self-control to keep from running up the stairs after him and calling the whole thing off. Be brave, child, Worm said. Come, climb onto my back. We have things to see. He slid farther out and wiggled along the ground, his head lying in the water at the far side of the cavern. I climbed onto his back and held on tight, once again feeling the invisible bonds that held me close like a safety harness. He moved slowly into the earth and then quicker through his labyrinth of tunnels. What you will see presently is mere possibility. Your dream last night was also a possibility. First, I will show you the past, that which has been locked in the archive of time as fact. Afterward, I will show you the realm of future possibilities, where time wiggles and wobbles and loops back on itself. You will see the nature of time and the consequences of the choices you make. Will you endure and complete the task, or will you run? You have the freedom to choose. I cannot stop you from abandoning the quest. No one can. I can only show you the possible results of your choices. We crept in the silent, warm darkness beneath his glittering realm of winter. We ascended, leaving the womb of the earth and emerging into a beautiful forest. The trees were full of life, and birds were chirping from the branches. This world seemed different. There was no trace of heaviness or oppression. It was delightful. A joyous sun cast its beams through the burgeoning branches, gold and green. Where are we? The Central Lands, Worm answered. 1,000 ages ago. Wow, the warlord sure did a number on this place. To your left is the dead spring. Watch. I turned and saw it then. Grass growing all around and deep green moss clinging to the rocks that made up the wall of the well. I felt like I was in a fairy tale. A beautiful forest on a perfectly peaceful sunny day. But all hell was about to break loose. A troop of dwarf women were headed toward the spring, talking and laughing like old friends. The water in the spring began to move, churning from deep within. I saw the warlord's black hair first. It floated on the surface of the water like a spray of oily seaweed. Then the rest of him began to emerge, rising out of the spring. He looked dead. 2 thin blue arms pushed him up and over the rim of the well, rolling him out onto the soft grass that surrounded it. I saw Silver come up a little way out of the water, blow a kiss to him, and sink back down into her realm. The dwarf women ran to tend to him, shouting back and forth with excitement. They made a hasty sling with their cloaks and rolled the pale, naked man onto it, taking him with them on their way back to the castle of Rune. We slid back into the earth and emerged moments later in the courtyard of the castle. The statues seemed different now, much less evil, but they were still strange images, and I shivered involuntarily. An old dwarf man in a dark brown cloak rushed out to greet the women, struggling to haul in their catch of the day. I saw the eyes of the warlord open briefly, the vibrant green of them shining with cruelty. He was a very large man, stacked with muscle and rippling with power. It was easy to see that he was not all human. He looked like a titan from the Greek legends. The dwarves carried him into the castle, attending him and nursing him back to health. The old man seemed unhappy about this turn of events, but he said nothing, merely standing in the courtyard with his arms crossed over his long beard. Worm ducked beneath the earth again, and we came out a few moments later in the middle of a clearing. The trees were the same as in the central lands, oak and pine and maple, but they looked sick somehow. It was as if something was draining all the color and beauty from the land too slowly for anyone to grow alarmed by it. The warlord was standing in the clearing with a dozen dwarves, all coated with armor and bearing swords. The dwarves were learning how to fight. They were hacking at a large stuffed dummy with almost comical flourishes. Making up for their lack of skill with ferociousness, each of them was jabbing and thrusting like armor-clad ninjas. We moved to another scene in the great hall of the Rune castle, where a large feast was taking place. Hundreds of dwarves sat on each side of an enormous dining table that stretched from one end of the hall to the other. Red was so prominent a color that it washed out all other colors in the room. The tapestries and pennants were all a deep maroon lined with gold, and even the gold took on the red glow, like sunset's fury. The warlord sat in the place of honor at the head of the table, a beautiful dwarf woman seated at his right side. She was dark, like him, with deep brown hair and eyes, and skin as pale as mine. They looked as if they belonged together, and I felt some sadness for Silver, though I thought she dodged a bullet. This must be Ishara Rune, the one he betrayed Silver for. The dwarves were making a racket. Some were falling from their chairs, giggling. Others fell over, passed out cold. They were drunk. Ishara and the warlord seemed the only sober ones in the room. But no, there was the old man, his arms crossed in the corner, watching the shameful behavior of his kindred. The warlord cast a disinterested glance in his direction and stood, holding his arms high and commanding the room. "Friends, mighty dwarves, you are now the only creatures in the elemental world who possess the knowledge of sword-making." The dwarves cheered. "Wine-making," more cheers, "and the refining of metals." The room exploded with shouting. The warlord's voice carried over it all, the ever-present note of cruelty wrestling with the general uproar and rising victorious. "Now is the time. The southern lands are the most dangerous to us. They have command of fire. They can burn hot enough to melt our swords and slay your people where they stand." The cheers took on a sinister tone. "Let us go tonight and conquer their kingdom. The dwarves will be rulers of all," he screamed. The dwarves rose and began waking their drunken companions. Some ran out and back into the great hall with bundles of armor and weapons. They were preparing for battle. It was the dawn of the Aeon of War. An elf was there in the great hall, backing into the passageway beyond. That must be Orr, the elf who came to study at the feet of the warlord. He was dressed in brilliant green and clearly upset by this turn of events, getting out of the way of the frenzied drunken dwarves who were all sharpening weapons and putting on armor. It was like looking into a hornet's nest after it was kicked by a cruel boy. Suddenly, a fire sprite burst into the room all aflame, hopping and shouting, "Hear me! Hear me!" He wasn't able to say more. The dwarves misunderstood his intent. They began to kick him, causing him to fall to the ground in a crumpled heap of sputtering flame. I wanted to intervene, but knew I couldn't. This was the past, already fixed in place. They carried him into the darkness of the passageways. The elf sank back, blending into the corridor. We stayed longer in this scene, watching the dwarves march out with murder in their eyes and metal in their hands. The warlord and Ishara remained seated until the last dwarf left. The old man in the corner had vanished. "Look closer," Worm said. I did, leaning far to the right, still held by the invisible bonds that allowed me to safely ride the giant earthworm. I saw the old dwarf then, lying in a puddle of blood where he had stood only moments ago. Ishara was staring at him, disbelieving. "You killed my father?" she asked, bewildered and grief-stricken. "He did not understand our plan. He would have tried to stop the war. Now your race will reach glory you had never before dreamed of." "But my father—" "Silence," he said. "The time has come for us to leave. I can do no more for them here. We must go now." She stepped back a few paces from him, wanting to go to the corpse. Cridgel-Lort grabbed her by the neck and threw her across the room toward the door. She landed hard on her spine and was unable to breathe for a time. He came and stood over her, evil flowing out of him and filling the room like a deadly gas. "Get up," he said. "We are going." She tried, but couldn't quite manage. He pulled her to her feet by her hair and pushed her. She staggered out the door, weeping for her father. Worm and I retreated from this event and arrived at the dead spring at the moment just before Cridgel-Lort had escaped from the mess he had made of this world. Ishara was still crying, unwilling to go, but terrified of the creature forcing her. When they reached the spring, he picked her up forcefully and tossed her into the water like a rag doll. He jumped in after her, chanting something under his breath and holding tightly to her hand. She struggled, wanting to get away from him, but it was too late for her. I saw Silver rise up from the spring next to them, with a murderous expression on her face. She had a knife in her hand that looked like the snout of a saw shark. She raised her weapon, and the warlord smiled coldly at her. The hands of the spring were already pulling him and Ishara down into the abyss between worlds. Silver cried out, stabbing at him, but it was too late. They were gone. She let out a shriek of such intensity it broke my heart to hear it. I wished she had ended up killing him. We could have avoided all this nonsense. "Now I will show you the possible futures," Worm said. It took a bit longer to reach our next time period. We popped up and I was in my nightmare. It was exactly the same, only this time I was watching myself go through it from a safe distance. Glenn and I had almost reached the spring. He was handing me the parcels. I wondered what was in them. I put both hands up and twirled them around in a circle, causing a barrier of earth to rise high in a bulwark around us. I saw the arrow that had killed Glenn in my nightmare pierce the rampart, causing us no harm. I sighed heavily on Worm's back and saw myself sigh the same way, slumped over the dead spring, taking a moment to thank God that he was safe. "You see, Alana, the warlord knows your weakness. He knows you can't bring yourself to lose Glenn, even to save our world. He showed you that nightmare, hoping to scare you away from your task." "Did a good job of it, too," I said, shuddering. "Yes, but he made a mistake in showing you the future, because the future can change. You now know to put up a shield between you and the fairies, which you would not have known if you hadn't been shown the dream." So, he messed up. Glad to know that's possible. "Now let me show you another possibility." He slid back into the earth, and we went like a drill, down and down into the mantle, much deeper than he'd yet taken me. The air here was suffocating, close and moist. I was beginning to get claustrophobic as we brushed the crushing walls of the tunnel, on and on, as though we'd never reach our destination. I wanted out. Suddenly, we burst into open space, slowing to a hover in the upper atmosphere, suspended somehow between the orb and the stars. I thought I was about to die from lack of oxygen, but Worm said, "I can shield us for a short time." I looked down at the world beneath us. It looked utterly foreign. The landmass was one large shape, with one ocean, the world not spherical, but oblong. It was beautiful. "So, you have an ocean all around, not just in the west," I said. There were small islands, too, many of them green and lush, winking up from the sapphire sea. "Yes, but you cannot reach the sea anywhere but the west. It is walled off by the mountain ranges, as you see." I did see. All around the landmass, except to the west, was a rim of giant mountain ranges. It looked like the edge of a bowl that was badly chipped on one side. I was transfixed by the beauty and the elegant design of it. "Keep watching," Worm said, his tone puzzling. I watched, and from the center of the world, the dead spring, I supposed, a beam of light shot out in a column that extended past us up into space. The noise was terrible, like millions of people screaming. The ground around the spring started to ripple and crack. The ocean shook, and massive tsunamis rushed in on the western lands. I saw the majestic mountains of the north crumble into dust. The magical forests of the east fell, and I heard the cries of the people below as they perished violently with their world. The southern lands erupted, the volcano exploding like Vesuvius, destroying rock and Ptah and every living thing. I watched the destruction of the world I loved. Glenn, myself, I assumed, and all the others were dying before my eyes. It was overwhelming. The land crumbled, and everything I loved fell into the sea and was swallowed up. Then, even the sea exploded, and a shockwave expanded violently outward, the power of the elementals sent out into the universe. The warlord had won, and it was my fault. Nothing was left, not chunks of rock, not smoke or fire, absolutely nothing but black space. Cold and unforgiving dark matter became the tomb of the elemental world. "Take me back," I pleaded. "Do you understand now?" he asked, sliding backward into space and transitioning into the crushing damp of the inner world. It was a long ride back to the cave under the house of stone, and I was struck silent by what I had seen. Eventually, I answered, "I do." The tears didn't stop, even though I was back on the world I loved with the elf man I loved waiting upstairs for me. I'd seen everyone die and could never let that happen. I couldn't lose Glenn, but now I knew that I could use the revelations of the warlord to my advantage. Once and for all, my mind was made up. "Worm?" "Yes, Alana." "You said time was wiggly and looped back on itself." "I did." "So you're saying that time is a bit like an earthworm?" I teased feebly. "It is indeed. Perhaps that's why I alone have the power to traverse its loops and squiggles," he said, amused. "Thanks for showing me. That last one hurt quite a bit to see, but it's nothing compared to knowing it could really happen. Because of me. I really have no choice. I either do it and possibly lose Glenn, or forsake it and definitely lose him and everything I love. You don't have to worry. I'll do what I must to save your world." "I know you will, child. I have great faith in you. We all do." Soon we emerged back into the cavern beneath the house of stone. I felt the invisible bands release me, and I slid down onto solid ground. I hugged Worm and began to walk away when I was struck by a thought. "Worm, We've been here quite a while. When will it be safe to travel back to the eastern lands? In about 4 days. The winter has been mild. Then you can go home to meet your new elven family. About a moon cycle ahead of schedule. Good. I was startled when I realized what he'd said. I have elven family? By marriage, of course. Oh, I said, finally understanding. Glenn's family. Gosh, I hadn't even thought of him having family. I never had any myself. He comes from a good line. They will like you, I'm sure, he said, and disappeared back into the soil. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.